Hi, everyone.
Greetings. We're in Ray Franz' Crisis of Conscience, Predictions and Presumption. He's just been dealing with how he himself, as the Watchtower's chief writer in those days, in the 1970s, knew too little about 1914 and its development and the changes until he read Carlo F. Johnson.
Who'd sent research to the Watchtower.
Yeah, and we know what happened to Mr. Johnson and later to Ray Franz because of this private research they were doing, which led them right out of the tower, as happens with most of us when we know the history, even of the 1914 teaching. So he goes on here to explain more about the history and development of that doctrine,
Okay.
even before the 1970s. Things were changing.
Most of Jehovah's Witnesses understand that this explanation leading to 1914 is more or less unique with their organization, and that it was initially published by the Society's first president, Pastor Russell. On its inside cover, the Society's publication, Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose, contained these statements, quote, 1870, Charles Taze Russell begins his study of the Bible with a small group of associates. 1877, the book Three Worlds is published identifying the date 1914 as the end of Gentile times. End of quote. The impression given here as well is that presented within the book is that this book, The Three Worlds, of which Russell was co-author, was the first publication to contain this teaching about 1914. This is what I had thought until the material from the Swedish elder came in to the world headquarters. Then I realized how many facts had been either ignored or glossed over by the Society's publications.
Yeah, I do remember when I came along, that book, the Divine Purpose book, was the official history that had been published just a decade or so before. And certainly I got the impression from all the Watchtower publications around 1970-71 that this was a unique insight that was somehow given to Pastor Russell.
Yeah.
So what's the truth? The fact that Ray Franz doesn't know it is astounding to me because he's researching the aid book, etc.
Right.
Ray goes on, Johnson first traced the long history of chronological speculation. He showed that the practice of arbitrarily applying the year for a day formula, which of course is the basis for the 1914 calculation, to various time periods found in the Bible, was initially done by Jewish rabbis dating back to the 1st century CE. In the 9th century CE, a string of Jewish rabbis began making calculations and predictions, utilizing this day-year formula in connection with the time periods of 1290, 1335, and 2300 days found in Daniel's prophecy, in each case applying their results to the time for the appearance of the Messiah. Among professed Christians, the practice first surfaces in the 12th century, beginning with the Roman Catholic abbot Joachim of Florus. Not only the periods of days found in Daniel's prophecy, but also the period of 1260 days mentioned in Revelation, chapters 11, verse 3, and chapter 12, verse 6, were now interpreted by employing the year for a day method. As time went along, a remarkable succession of dates was arrived at by the different interpreters, their predictions including the year 1260, then 1360, and later various dates in the 16th century. Changes and new interpretations were regularly made necessary as one date after another eventually passed without the foretold event taking place.
I could wish that somebody at the door had said to me, well, who says that a day for a year, that you should apply that to every passage? But nobody ever questioned that. I think that might have rocked me.
It might have. And he does deal with that next, right? Which is, where do they get the justification for this? Because it's not just a Watchtower error. It's an error that existed, as he points out here, for 1,000 years before.
In 1796, George Bell, writing in a London magazine, predicted the fall of the Antichrist, according to his view, the Pope. This was to come in 1797 or 1813, his prediction being based on an interpretation of the 1260 days, but using a different starting point than other interpreters. Some had begun their count from the birth of Christ, others from the fall of Jerusalem, others from the start of the Catholic Church. His prediction was written during the French Revolution. Not long after he made it, a shocking event took place. The Pope was taken captive by French troops and forced into exile. Many took this as a most remarkable fulfillment of Bible prophecy, and 1798 was accepted by them as the end of the prophetic 1260 days. From this developed the view that the following year, 1799, marked the beginning of the last days. Further upheavals in Europe produced is it spat or spate? Okay, produced a spate of new predictions. Among the predictors was a man in England named John Aquila Brown. In the early 1800s, he published an explanation of the 23,000 days, or 2,300 days, okay, I said that right, of Daniel, chapter 12, showing these as ending in 1844 CE. This understanding was also adopted by the American pioneer of the Second Advent movement, William Miller. We will see how these calculations later came to play a role in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses.
But John Aquila Brown developed another explanation that is intimately related to the year 1914, as that date figures in the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses. How so? The evidence is that Brown was the real originator of the interpretation of the 7 times of Daniel chapter 4, the interpretation that produces the 2,520 years by means of the day-year formula. Brown first published this interpretation in 1823, and his method converted the 7 times into 2,520 years in exactly the same way found today in Watchtower publications. This was 29 years before Charles Taze Russell was born, 47 years before he began his Bible study group, and more than a half century before the book The Three Worlds appeared, which was in 1877, by the way, 2 years before the Watchtower. And Ray says, I was totally unaware of this before reading the material sent to the Society from Sweden. John Aquila Brown, however, started his 2,520-year period in 604 BCE, and therefore had it ending in 1917 CE. He foretold that then the full glory of the kingdom of Israel shall be perfected. Now, we've made a video before where we talk about Grattan Guinness, who picks up this idea of 1917 from Brown, apparently, and he links it to the restoration of Israel, as Russell did in those days, but he dated it to erroneously, on 2 errors really put together. He dated it from 606 to 1914, forgetting there's no 0 year. So 2 errors, but Guinness is a better scholar than Russell, and he had the calculation correct, but dated it from 604 to 1917. And what did happen in 1917? Jerusalem was liberated by General Allenby in the First World War, and has been free since. And the Jews have returned. So what's not evident to you here as you filter or process all of this material is, if we're going to give credit to anybody then of having God's Spirit upon him, it has to be John Aquila Brown, who was an Orthodox Christian, by the way. And all of these people who speculated about this stuff, some of them were scholars, but the great majority of Bible scholars did not follow this year-day reckoning. Some did.
Were they?
But almost all the amateurs who were into prophetic interpretation did follow the year-day system.
And is it true that the amateurs are usually more dogmatic than
Yeah.
than
sure,
the ones that are just, doing the guy thing, the numbers
The
and
numbers
the
thing, the guy
calculation.
Yeah.
I call it the guy thing.
But the consensus among Christian scholars during this period was not premillennialism of any kind, and it certainly wasn't the restoration of Israel soon to happen and dated from 1914 or 17. It was postmillennialism, which was a progressive idea of the fulfillment of prophecy, that the church has replaced Israel and is going to be the means by which Christ blesses the world before he comes again. That was the dominant consensus. But then premillennialism really reared its head emphatically and aggressively from this period of John Fuller Brown onward. But you don't know any of this, and of course Ray Franz didn't know any of this. But the main thought of John Fuller Brown and the other interpreters is that after the Gentile times are over, God will turn his attention again to Israel. What is our link? I think I have Carl Johnson here, but my print is so small I can hardly read it. Carl Olaf Johnson and our basic JW playlist. So we have several videos on Johnson. So we put the first one on, which is about his book, The Gentile Times Reconsidered. And we have a basic JW playlist as well that I'll put on your screen.
Good.
See you next time.